evaluate the fit between Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland, and they expect that the Cavaliers ultimately may have to choose one of them. Cavs will be able to offer Donovan Mitchell a 4-year, almost $209 million contract extension this summer. They want him to stay.
He said to me, I know I've got decisions to make this offseason. My agent and I will talk to Cleveland about that at the right time, but he emphasized that I am not leaving this season unhappy.
Yeah.
I'm leaving it more determined.
So the Cleveland Cavaliers were eliminated in the playoffs, and honestly, not too much of a surprise. Not saying it's a disappointing season by any stretch of the imagination. Cleveland finished this year with nearly 50 wins, probably higher than many people expected, especially when taking into consideration the amount of injuries that it sustained, and also they lost to the Boston Celtics. Everybody kind of knows that they're going to lose to Boston. However, outside of the second round exit by the hands of the Celtics, a much bigger picture is on display because we all want to know what's going to happen next in Cleveland. Because depending on what happens in the upcoming weeks heading into the offseason, there's a lot of things, and I do mean a lot of things that could change in the landscape of not only in Cleveland, but also the rest of the NBA. And at the epicenter of it all has a lot to do with Donovan Mitchell. Now, 2 years ago, the Utah Jazz decided to blow it up because they weren't really going anywhere in the Western Conference. In the process of doing so, they sent Rudy Gobert to the Minnesota Timberwolves, received a bunch of draft capital in the process, and also sent Donovan Mitchell out to Cleveland. And in return, they received Larry Markkinen, Colin Sexton, and again, a lot of draft capital, which is a terrible thing for the NBA because Danny Ainge is running Utah right now, and him having a bunch of draft capital, and I don't think I need to remind people how he used to just hoard draft picks when he was in Boston. So yeah, that's not really good. And so because of that, that's basically just step one and a huge incentive to why Cleveland wants to stay as relevant as possible. So those draft picks don't become something of significance that Danny Ainge can leverage in trying to build another really good team out of Utah. But nevertheless, at the time, it was fairly easy to be optimistic about this transaction for Cleveland because at the time, there was a lot of potential that was seen in the two young players in Evan Mobley and Darius Garland. Now fast forward to where we are today, and not so much, man. Now, this does not mean that Garland and Mobley are bad players by any stretch of the imagination, but they were asked to make a pretty significant leap within a finite amount of time because they needed to convince Donovan Mitchell that Cleveland is a good place for him to stay long term because he can actually compete. But that just hasn't been the case at all. The lack of progression, especially from Evan Mobley, has really hindered and put a ceiling on what this team can achieve in the postseason, and it's not a championship, it's not a finals appearance, and depending on the side of the bracket, it's not even a conference finals appearance. This is now the second postseason in a row where this team has failed to make the conference finals, and they've done so in similar fashion, and that has been over leveraging Donovan Mitchell's scoring and playmaking ability, as he's really the only consistent scoring option out in Cleveland. Which kind of brings us to where we are today, and that is, what exactly is Donovan Mitchell going to do, because he only has one more guaranteed year left in his contract. Of course, this means that Cleveland is going to offer him a contract extension, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to take it, and the articles have started to flow in just ridiculously. A lot of conversations around JB Bickerstaff, the coaching staff, and strategy, practice styles, all that bunch of nonsense, but moreover, the fit that is the rest of this team and how exactly can they structure, which kind of leads us to a bunch of different options, but all of which really needs to be fundamentally sounding the idea of Cleveland being a contending team. And I think that's something that many people are failing to understand. Bringing back Donovan Mitchell is possible, especially if they can do a lot of smooth talking, but if you're Cleveland, you also don't want to put yourself in a situation like the Wizards did, where they doubled down on Bradley Beal and it didn't really lead to much of anything, and then you end up losing him for practically nothing a few years down the line, effectively just wasting his career away. And the same thing can go for Donovan Mitchell as well. You don't want to put yourself in that situation either, just chasing the money when you could, realistically speaking, just do a sign and trade and go to other teams such as the Miami Heat or the Los Angeles Lakers, which is something that has been an ongoing conversation for past few days now. Now, because of that, there has been a lot of conversations and quotes in the media over the past couple of days, some of which Donovan Mitchell said himself is cap. He's been on Twitter saying that some of these things are lies. A lot of other things, however, D-Mitch hasn't really said much of anything about either, which I think is very strategic because you want to hold as much leverage as possible. Now, one of the options that I've seen pretty consistently, and I do believe there's a lot of merit behind this, is moving off of Darius Garland. Now, again, I don't want to say that DG is a bad point guard by any stretch of the imagination. However, when you present a situation to Garland, even at a fairly young age, you would hope that he would meet these expectations of being a second or maybe even third option. But in these postseason runs in the last 2 years, he's just been fairly underwhelming. This year in the playoffs, Garland was only averaging 16 points, 6 assists, 3 to 4 rebounds, and shooting splits of 43, 35, and 81. I don't want to be overly critical on him. He's only like, 24, 25 years old, so there's still a lot of room for improvement. But once more, this is a team that's trying to expedite the process of getting to where they need to be because they have someone like Donovan Mitchell on their roster that they want to maximize. And because it is just naturally, there's been conversations about moving him and bringing in a replacement that actually might be a better fit in the backcourt with Donovan Mitchell, because even if Darius Garland is going to reach his potential, it might not just be in the same backcourt with D. Mitch, as both of them are two undersized, like 6'1" guards who love to have the ball in their hands and are scorers. No real height, no real size, no real defensive prowess. So there's a possibility that is also just a really bad fit. And because of this, there have been several rumors and tweets about Garland going to the Minnesota Timberwolves or possibly even the New Orleans Pelicans, two teams that are looking for a potential upgrade at the point guard position. Minnesota is looking for a successor in Mike Conley as he's getting older. Obviously, you want someone to replace him. I do believe Garland is a really good option, especially for a team that lacks a little bit of continuity on the offensive side and needs a little bit more explosiveness. Mike Conley's done a really good job, but I do think that Garland would be a much needed and necessary upgrade in those regards. But I do believe something that's a bit more palatable and that also address a lot of questions and concerns for both teams is if Garland gets traded to the New Orleans Pelicans. The Pelicans are also looking to move off of Brandon Ingram, who hasn't been the greatest fit alongside Zion and CJ McCollum. But more importantly, you look at what has been going on in New Orleans, and they've been needing a point guard basically ever since they moved off Alonzo a few years ago. CJ McCollum is playing pseudo point guard, but that obviously isn't the best option. DG should fit in really well. Of course, there are questions about having a backcourt of Darius Garland and CJ McCollum, but I think if you are New Orleans, you'll think about that later on. And if you're Cleveland, if you receive Brandon Ingram in the transaction, B.I. didn't have the greatest postseason run by any stretch of the imagination, but he was effectively trying to play the number one option when he's probably not that at all. If you now place him in Cleveland, we're now talking about a scoring option in the front court that this team desperately needs because they've been running with Isaac Okoro, Jared Allen, and Evan Mobley, which definitely hasn't been enough whatsoever. And also, and more importantly, get a lot of height and size on the perimeter, which is something that this team also is lacking as well. And if that happens, then you might not have to do any transactions whatsoever in terms of the fit between Mobley and Allen, because that's also been a question and concern. The lack of spacing and offensive ability cannot be hidden over their defensive prowess. And quite frankly, the Cavaliers have still looked like a really solid defensive unit, even when one of them are just on the floor instead of both of them. And if they decide to move in a different direction, it is going to be very interesting on which player they decide to move. A lot of reports are more so leaning towards moving Jared Allen. He's older on a much more manageable contract. And I do believe there's a lot of teams in the NBA that will be looking for his services that would be able to, in return, give a lot more flexible pieces to kind of fill out the rest of this roster, which has also been a pretty significant problem with this team. Coming off the bench, it's basically been no one whatsoever. I will say this, Evan Mobley, again, I don't want to be too critical on young players here, but Mobley not developing into the player that he was supposed to be is something that has not been talked about at all over the past 2 years. When the Jazz decided to blow up their team and Minnesota and Cleveland took a risk on the two stars and Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell, they both had two young players that they were also banking on as well. In Minnesota, of course, you have Anthony Edwards, and that has really panned out completely. But because Anthony Edwards has met expectations, lived up to the hype, and I would even argue exceed them, you have a Wolves team that is being able to compete with the defending champions with the Denver Nuggets. But on the other side of the NBA in the Eastern Conference, a Cavaliers team has not been able to really meet their standard because Evan Mobley has not developed offensively. Defensively, the ceiling is still through the roof, switchability, great rebounder, but it does really beg the question, if you are a team like Cleveland, do you really have the timetable to roll the dice and just play with potential instead of actually getting something that has been consistent, concrete, and undeniable? But even with all that being said, it cannot be overstated enough that just because you make these trades, that does not mean that all of a sudden that you can still compete. I love B.I., and who knows what they can get for Jared Allen or Evan Mobley, but is that enough to really compete in the Eastern Conference that should be better next year with Milwaukee being healthy, with Giannis and Dame, the Celtics still going to be relevant, and I'm pretty sure the Sixers are going to try to make a massive move as well, as they're trying to capitalize off of the latter part of Joel Embiid's contract as well. There's still these conversations. I think by far one of the most frustrating things about the Eastern Conference is that it's much easier for teams out east to condition themselves that they're actually closer than what they are due to playoff runs and the other side of the bracket where they get to avoid competent teams, which then makes them believe that, oh man, we're just like, we're make one or two pieces and all of a sudden we're really there. Something that happens with the Chicago Bulls. I've seen this happen with the Atlanta Hawks. And unlike in the Western Conference where you get hit with the brutal, honest truth over and over and over again because you have to match up with really good teams in the first round. So even if you have a team that consists of, I don't know, Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert, you start to come to that realization sooner than later because you understand that you're nowhere near close to actually competing. Eastern Conference, you effectively are just trying to beat a Boston Celtics team that has shown a lot of questionable behavior in the postseason. And because of that, I can see a world where the Cavaliers can easily convince themselves that, hey, we got this trade package, and hey, we got Brandon Ingram, and hey, we got a new head coach, and hey, we got all all of these pieces, this is why you should stay with us. And that really and truly could change the trajectory and the complexion of the rest of the NBA. Because there have been a couple of teams over the past few years that have positioned themselves for a potential sign and trade to receive Donovan Mitchell, and that might not be on the table. But if it is, Miami, of course, is at the top of the list. There's been ongoing conversations over the past couple of years of why they haven't traded Tyler Hero and or Duncan Robinson. And honestly, this might be the reason why. If you are the Heat, having a team that features Bam Adebayo, Jimmy Butler, and Donovan Mitchell will certainly thrust you into championship conversations, and I believe is a much better situation to be in the Eastern Conference if you are Donovan Mitchell. I do believe there's a huge reason why the Los Angeles Lakers didn't go all in and try to force their way to a DeJounte Murray transaction during the trade deadline, because I'm pretty sure they realized if we just held on to our assets for a few more months, really try to maximize the team we have now, we can make a much better and more significant transaction during the offseason, and that is getting D. Mitch. And if you are D. Mitch, even though yes, you're going to be going in the Western Conference, going in a team that features Anthony Davis and LeBron James also sounds like a significantly better option than anything that Cleveland can offer you. And because of that, that's the reason why I do feel like it is inevitable that D. Mitch will be traded. Sure, I hear all of the ruckus and noise and the rowdiness of, oh, D. Mitch seems like he's happy. D. Mitch wants to stay. I've even gone through Donovan Mitchell's likes, and it definitely comes across like he wants to stay in Cleveland. But I also believe that's just a strategy that certain players may have up their sleeve to try to get as much as they possibly can. And yes, Cleveland can make transactions. Yes, they can make upgrades. But truth of the matter is, a team with Brandon Ingram or whoever you get from a Darius Garland or Evan Mobley or Jared Allen trade is not going to be anywhere near close to a team that Donovan Mitchell could potentially go to, such as a Miami Heat or a Los Angeles Lakers. So that's just my thoughts. But nevertheless, this is going to be ongoing for the upcoming weeks heading into the off season. I do believe we should receive a little bit more noise, and regardless of what may happen with Donovan Mitchell, it is undeniable that Darius Garland and possibly even Evan Mobley will be shopped around the NBA. So keep your eye on any type of transaction that includes those two. It will be very interesting to see what's going to happen next to Cleveland, because again, regardless if D. Mitchell leaves or not, there's going to be some talent on the move in the next upcoming months. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I personally, D. Mitch, LA, as a Laker fan, I wouldn't be mad at it whatsoever. New Big Three, championship, I do believe that D. Mitch going to another team just makes the most sense for him and even Cleveland. But yo, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the subscribe button, notification bell, and until next time, I'll see you all later. Peace!